Hi, everybody. Good morning. Hope you had a great weekend. Hope everyone is doing well, staying healthy, and everything is good. We got through our first week. I like to think that it was a successful week. I think everything went really well, and I'm glad that we're getting into the swing of things. Again, I know that this is new and this is challenging for everybody, but we are on the right track. So we're going to continue with our discussion and our lessons on mitosis and cell division. Except we're going to now move on from mitosis, right? So last week we discussed cell division and mitosis. So just as a quick recap, cell division is when a cell will split and divide into two identical copies, right? So one mother cell divides into two daughter cells. Mitosis occurs in both unicellular and multicellular organisms. Remember, we spoke about how the reasons might be different. For instance, for a unicellular organism, they would undergo mitosis to duplicate the whole cell and replicate itself. Whereas in a multicellular organism like us, it may be because we got into an accident, right? A car accident, and we hurt our kidney. And our kidney got damaged, and now we need to repair those cells. So the kidney cells would undergo mitosis to replicate itself so that it can heal. Remember, mitosis is prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase, but realize the entire cell cycle is made up of more than that, right? Interphase comes before that, right? So it's first interphase, which is the G1, the S, and the G2 phase. Then you have mitosis, which is prophase, metaphase, telophase, anaphase, and telophase. And then you have cytokinesis. So remember, there's a lot to remember about mitosis. You need to remember the order of the cell cycle. You need to know all the phases. You need to know what happens in each phase. And you need to know how to identify the phases, right? As well as everything else that we did. But those are the key points. So make sure you go back to the previous videos if you do not know that. And make sure you continue to use your guided notes for this section. So we're going to now move on to something called meiosis, right? So we've been talking about mitosis, and now we're going to talk about meiosis. Meiosis is a little different. It will sound a little similar when we get to the phases, but we'll talk about why it's different and when it's used. Before we even get into meiosis, though, there are a couple of things in between that we need to discuss. So this slide right here is where we ended on Friday. We're going to move on to the next slide in a second, but before I do that, I just want to talk a little bit about what we're about to discuss. So up until this point, we've been talking about cell division when it is intentional. And what I mean by that is that cell division and mitosis happen for a reason, and they happen for a good reason, right? We need to repair something, we need to fix something, we need to duplicate something. Those are all regulated, right? And when I say regulated, we talk about what we have here on this slide, right? Cell cycle regulators. So we have proteins, we have enzymes that help signal and speed the reactions. So it's all very purposeful, and it all happens as it should. That's not always the case, right? Sometimes our cells will replicate, and they will keep replicating uncontrollably over and over and over again without any regulation. And that is called something very, very specific that we all know of. And I'm trying to not say the word yet because I want you to think about this while we're going through while I'm talking. I want you to think about it. What do you know of? What might you know of, heard of, that has to do with cells uncontrollably replicating, right? It's a big, big problem that a lot of people have to deal with, right? So think about that, but I'm going to move on to the next slide. I'm talking about cancer, right? So we've spoke about cancer, we've discussed it, we talked a little bit about it, but we really didn't get into the information very, very heavily, and we're not really going to here either, but we're going to talk about it a little more. Cancer cells, right? So when someone gets cancer, unfortunately, it's a very, very common disease, very, very deadly in some cases, not always, but a lot of the time. And it's a big problem that a lot of people have to deal with. And the whole reason is because of cell growth being uncontrolled, right? So cells that are cancerous do not respond to signals that regulate the growth of cells. So back on this other slide here, when we talk about proteins, we talk about enzymes, cancer cells don't respond to that. So what happens is they divide uncontrollably and form masses called tumors, right? So tumors, if you've ever seen a medical show, Grey's Anatomy, anything like that, and you see them remove a tumor, it literally looks like a ball, right? It's a mass. And what that is are cells that have clumped together. Now think about this for a second. We all know that cells are microscopic. You can't see them. But tumors are usually large. So think about how much they actually need to replicate, how uncontrollable they really are in order to get to that size that we can see them and hold them in our hands. Because that's what's really happening. The tumor cells are formed from uncontrollable cells that can't stop dividing. So if you get cancer in your colon, right? Colon cancer, it's a really serious one. That's because colon cells, right? The cells in your colon continuously divide. They are uncontrolled. They cannot stop, and they keep replicating and replicating. And then as they're replicating, the cells clump onto one another and create that mass called a tumor, right? And tumors damage healthy tissue, and they have some severe consequences, right? Some cancers are treatable. Some cancers are, you could remove the tumors with surgery. Sometimes the cancer has spread, which means now you don't just have cancer in your colon, but you also have it in your liver, and you also have it in your lungs, and you can have it anywhere, right? And that means that it's spread, it's metastasized, and it's moved throughout your body, and that becomes much more difficult to treat. There are a lot of techniques like radiation and chemotherapy which target these cells in particular and break them down, right? So they try to break the clumps up and they try to kill those cells so that it doesn't form anymore, which is effective depending on the location and the type and the stage that you're at, right? One important thing to remember is all cancers have this one thing in common. The protein regulators that control the cell cycle have failed. So going back to here, these proteins, right, they are not working. They have failed to do their job. Their whole job was to regulate cell growth. They were supposed to be the mediator. They were supposed to say, okay, you regulate now, you divide now, and then you stop dividing. Okay, now you divide, and then you stop dividing. They're not working. So these cells don't have a signal to stop dividing, and they just keep dividing. And that's when cancer arises, right? So, that is cancer, right? And we're not going to really talk more about it right now. We may get into it a little more in genetics, but for now, we're going to just leave it at that, okay? Let's talk about the different types of reproduction before we even get into meiosis, right? So asexual reproduction, we are all aware of what this is. This means that offspring are produced by only one parent, right? Each parent passes all of its genes to the offspring. Asexual, one parent produces another copy of itself, passing its genes and its DNA and everything to it. So it's essentially making a clone of itself, right? So there are some advantages and some disadvantages of asexual reproduction. The advantage of asexual reproduction is it's faster, much faster to reproduce asexually than it is sexually. Because of this part right here, the parent does not have to find a mate. So it becomes much easier to reproduce asexually because you don't need to find someone to mate with. You don't have to deal with that, right? The other advantage is that large numbers of offspring are produced. You're usually not going to have an asexually reproducing organism that just reproduces one, right? It will usually reproduce hundreds at a time. So it is advantageous because of its speed, because of its ease, right? Doesn't need to find a mate, and because of the quantity. Makes it a lot. The disadvantage, of course, is all of the offspring are exactly alike. There's no variation. Remember variation. We are going back to biodiversity. right? Remember, in an ecosystem, the stability is increased when there is a variation of species. The ecosystem thrives. The ecosystem survives when there are a lot of variation, right? This has to do with many things, one of them being disease, right? A disease will be less likely to kill everything if everything is different, right? It usually will just affect one or two types of organisms. Natural disasters, different types of food sources. This is all variation. Now, that concept stays true in an organism itself. If you are an asexually reproducing organism, right? If I reproduce asexually, a disease that can affect my genes are now going to affect the thousands of other genes and thousands other of organisms that I've created, because we're all the same. So what affects me will affect them. We are identical, right? And then the other disadvantage is this, right? The ability to adapt to a changing environment is greatly reduced. If I am an organism that reproduces asexually and I do not do well in the cold, right? Freezing temperatures slow down my heart rate and I can't survive. I've now produced 1,000 organisms that are exactly like me who also cannot survive in the cold. So if the environment that I live in happens to get cold, we're all going to die. So asexual reproduction is really not the preferred method of most organisms. Some of them do it. Some of them have no choice because they just are asexual. Some organisms can even switch. Some could be asexual for a little bit and then decide they want to sexually reproduce. And then they can go back to asexual reproduction, right? They have the option of doing either one. And we will talk about that in a little bit as well. So that's asexual. Sexual, of course, is reproduction that requires two parents. Now, one of the key differences very, very quickly and right off the bat is that in asexual reproduction, you get your genes from that one parent. It is one parent, 100% of the genes are getting passed on. In sexual reproduction, there's two parents, so that's the first change. And the second change is that each parent only passes half of its genes, right? Which means you get 50% from your father and 50% from your mother, as opposed to 100% from, either one. So that is the second difference. It needs to be male and female, right? Sexual reproduction, we are all aware, needs to require a male and a female. The men produce the sperm and the female produce the egg. So that's what we see here. The sperm is this part, right? It's all of the white part here. And then the egg is, of course, the egg, right? We're going to learn about what happens here and how the chromosomes and the DNA get replicated. And that's how we really get into this idea of meiosis, right? So sexual reproduction. So sexual reproduction has its advantages. Of course, you're going to see that this is pretty much the opposite of asexual. The advantages of sexual reproduction is they are all genetically different. The disadvantages are the parents must find a mate, so it is a little more complicated. It is more time consuming, right? It takes longer, and fewer offspring will be produced. Most sexually reproducing organisms do not produce a ton of organisms at once, right? Humans are a perfect example. For the most part, we produce one at a time. Sometimes you'll have twins, maybe you'll have triplets or quadruplets, which are very, very, very rare. But for the large majority of the population, it's one child at a time, and it takes 9 months, right? So it's not like you can get pregnant, have the baby, and then get pregnant again next week, right? There's a long gestation period. It takes a long time to grow that fetus, and then there is a lag period between when you could have a baby again, right? Most women, after they give birth, are advised by their doctors they can't have sex and they can't get pregnant again for usually months, right? Because it takes a toll on the female body. Being pregnant and giving birth is very taxing. So there is a lot of disadvantages to it, but this advantage right here outweighs all of the disadvantages, right? We want that genetic variability. We need that. Especially, there are a lot of reasons, right? Think of what's going on right now, why we're doing this over over video, right? The coronavirus, COVID-19, right? Think about the genetic variability. If we as a population around the world, right, we're all the same, we would all be dead, right? That's just the truth. Think about our genes. If the disease were to affect one of us and all of us shared the same genetic makeup, the disease would affect all of us, right? But that's thankfully not the case because of sexual reproduction. We are all very different. And while a lot of people are unfortunately contracting this disease, it is affecting everybody very differently, right? We see that, the death rates, the severity is very different depending on your age, depending on the types of pre-existing conditions that you had. And a lot of that plays into our genetic makeup. So we should be very thankful for sexual reproduction and thankful for the ability that we have to be genetically different, right? It helps us when it comes to diseases. It helps us when it comes to survival as far as our environment goes. It is the preferred and the best way to do things. So, we did see before asexual reproduction has its advantages, but there are more advantages through sexual. The other thing that we need to remember about sexual reproduction are these three terms. They are going to come up all the time. They're going to come up a lot. You need to remember what they are. Gametes are sex cells. Sex cells are egg and sperm. So if you see the word gamete, you think sex cells. You then think an egg cell and a sperm cell. Gametes are eggs, gametes are sperm, right? Gamete is just the overall term that defines that. If someone says an egg, that is a type of gamete. If someone says sperm, that is a type of gamete, right? They, of course, come from different people, right? Egg is from female, sperm is from the male, but they are both gametes. Fertilization, if you see that term, fertilization, that is referring to the union of the sperm and the egg. So the second the sperm penetrates the egg is now said to be fertilized. And that is the process of fertilization. And a zygote is now a fertilized egg. So before fertilization occurs, you just have two gametes. You have a sperm and you have an egg. The second the sperm penetrates the egg, it has become fertilized. And now the fertilized egg is known as a zygote. It's no longer known as an egg. All right, so these are three important terms to remember. Cell division and chromosome number. Let me just take a quick look and see where we're at because I do not want to start meiosis today. All right, that's over here. So we have a couple of more slides to go. Let's get through it. So cell division and chromosome number. So if an organism is the result of sexual reproduction, as we are, as most organisms are, it will have two sets of chromosomes, right? One set comes from the mother and one set comes from the father. This is where we were discussing before how you get 50% from mom, 50% from dad. This is what we're talking about. This is the 50%. You get half your chromosomes from mom, half your chromosomes from dad. And these sets are called homologous chromosomes. Homologous means the same, right? Homologous chromosomes are the two copies of each chromosome. One copy comes from the mother, one copy comes from the father, right? They carry the exact same genes, but they may have different expressions of that gene. What that means is that you can have a chromosome that carries the gene for blue eyes and carries the gene for brown eyes, right? That chromosome has the gene for both. But the expression of that gene, so what actually happens, what you see, could be different, right? So I happen to have blue eyes or green eyes, depending on how you see it, right? Some people say it's blue, some people say it's green. I think it's more green. But the gene that I have that gave me green eyes also had the gene for brown eyes, likely. The only difference is that the brown eyes was not expressed. I didn't end up expressing that. So it was there, but it didn't show up in me. So that's what we talk about when we have homologous chromosomes. This right here is one homologue. This is another homologue, right? This one comes from mom, this one comes from dad. This one comes from mom, this one comes from dad. They are the exact same chromosome, right? Notice how they're numbered, right? This is chromosome number 1. You get a chromosome number 1 from mom, you get a chromosome number 1 from dad. You get a chromosome number 2 from mom, a chromosome number 2 from dad, right? Each one of these is a chromosome. Because they are the same chromosome, they are homologous, right? But what occurs in each is going to be different. So this one here could have the blue eyes gene, this one could have the brown eyes gene. Whichever one gets expressed is what shows up in you. All right? This is a little confusing. All right? So I'm going to go through this one more time so we could all understand it. All right? Also, feel free to rewind if you want to hear again, but I'm going to quickly just recap. We get 50% from mom, 50% from dad, right? This is a total chromosome right here. This is a total chromosome right here. You get each one from mom and one from dad. The chromosomes are the same, right? These two are the same, 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 all the way through. The only difference is what is expressed in each. So the genes are alike, but the expression will change. So these both have the genes for blue and green and brown, but which one expresses what is what's going to be different. So, some people sometimes will say, oh, you have your mother's eyes. Oh, you have the same nose shape as your father. Oh, you have the same type of hair as your mother, right? That's because you got that particular gene from the chromosome that your mother gave you. You could have easily have gotten the one that your dad gave you. It just wasn't expressed. Okay? So we're going to learn a word called diploid, right? Diploid is an important word to know. You will likely see it on your regent. You will likely see it on a test, on a quiz, on homework. Diploid simply means that there are two kinds, there are two of each kind of chromosome in each cell, right? And that just goes back to what we have here. There are two types of each chromosome in each cell. Two types, right? So the symbol for diploid is 2N, right? N is the number of chromosomes that an organism has. And humans are 2N because we have two of each kind of chromosome, right? So we have 46 chromosomes total. We are considered 2N because we have 23 chromosomes times 2 to give us 46, right? So again, N is the number of different chromosomes an organism has. We have 23 different chromosomes right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and then this one is 23. X or Y, right? This one here determines what our sex is, whether we're male or female. There are 23 of them, right? So we take those 23, we multiply by 2, right? Because there are 2 of each, and that gives us our 46 total, right? If you were to count all of these, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, 32, 34, 36, 38, 40, 42, 44, 46, right? That is where we get our 46 chromosomes. But we are considered diploid organisms because we get 23 from mom, 23 from dad, okay? So when we talk about mitosis, we have one mother cell. Remember, one mother cell gives us 2 daughter cells. So we have one 2N cell. So this is one complete cell will give rise to 2 complete cells. Okay? Good. And this is the last slide that we'll cover. So chromosome number in gametes, right? So egg and sperm, remember, are our gametes. They must have half the number of chromosomes so that when added together, the zygote will have the proper number. Think about this. If each egg had 46 chromosomes and each sperm had 46 chromosomes, then when they fused, right, during fertilization, how many would we have? Right? We'd have 92 chromosomes, which is way more than we need. That's double what we need. We don't need that. So the entire purpose of mitosis, right, which is what we're going to learn about, is it prevents that from happening. So don't think about this right now. Well, let's think about that in a second, but let's continue with this real quick. Egg and sperm cells must have half the number, right? A normal egg cell has 46 chromosomes, and a normal sperm cell has 46 chromosomes. But we cannot let those two fuse, because then the number of chromosomes would again be 92. So what we need to do is we need to have those, right? We have to half the number of them. We need to take the egg cell that has 46 and we need to half it into 23. We need to take the sperm that has 46. We need to half that into 23. Then they're able to fuse and become a zygote that has the proper number. So the whole process of mitosis, which we're going to get into, meiosis is to go through that halving process so that we can properly fertilize an egg. All right. Let's look down here real quick. So we just spoke before how a zygote is 46, a zygote is 2N, we are 2N. Each egg and each sperm is just considered 1N, right? And that's called a haploid, right? So when you have a haploid here and a haploid here, you add 2 haploids to get 1 diploid, all right? Again, I'm going to say that again. You add 2 haploids to get 1 diploid. So each gamete is said to be a haploid because they contain only half of the total chromosome number. Okay, so this is a little confusing. I'm aware of that. Please ask questions if you need. Make sure you review this video again. Again, ask the questions. I understand the actual process of meiosis is a little simpler, but these couple of slides here from here, and here, I know that these 3 are a little confusing. All right. So make sure you are reviewing, and please ask questions if you need to. All right. We will continue and start meiosis tomorrow. Have a great day.